We know that Max Verstappen is fast, we know that he's aggressive, and we know that he can win virtually from anywhere on the grid. But what is the one trait that Max Verstappen has that makes him one of the greatest of all time? Okay, so shout out first of all to Michael Delorso. I hope I'm saying your name right, mate. You left us a comment after our video debating which of Max's titles was the best, saying that Max seems to kind of stay the same and everything changes around him. And I thought about that and I thought, wow, that's actually a really good summary of Max because actually it absolutely summarizes what Max's greatest trait is. And that for me is his adaptability. He's fast, we know that, and we know that he's aggressive, but the fact that he is able to maintain how fast he is despite different rule sets, different weather conditions, different track temperatures, and sometimes even a car that doesn't have quite the traits that he wants it to have, that adaptability is what keeps him absolutely on his toes. And I wanted to highlight what that means because where on the face of it, it sounds like I'm saying that he changes his driving style depending on what car he's in or the conditions he's in. That's not it. And I'm going to try and demonstrate to you what that looks like across two qualifying laps in two different seasons with two different rule sets. Okay, so we're going to look at a little bit of telemetry, and the first bit of telemetry is here. So this is Sector 2 at the Hungaroring 2019, and the laps that I've got here are Max Verstappen in dark blue versus Lewis Hamilton in turquoise, and I've just used those two because both drivers have almost polar opposite driving styles in terms of how they attack a corner. My summary really, the most important thing that distinguishes a driver's driving style is how they turn into a corner, right? And what we can see here is that Max in blue, remember, Max got pole position here. What we can see here are three traces. I haven't done telemetry in a while, so if you haven't watched any of our previous telemetry videos, what I'm looking at are the delta, the throttle, and the brake inputs for both drivers. The delta tells you the time difference between the two drivers. Max had the faster lap over the course of the entire lap, so therefore he has a dark blue straight line. Lewis had the slower line time overall, and any time his line is above Max's, that means he is slower at that point. Anytime his line is below Max's, the turquoise line is below the dark blue line. That's what the delta means. And you can see in Sector 2, Lewis was slower at the beginning and got slower still towards the end of that sector. But what's really interesting here is the throttle and the brake trace. Through the different corners, the first corner is the big sweep into turn 4, fast approach, left-hander over a crest. You can see that in this corner and the subsequent corners, Max comes off the throttle a bit earlier and hits the brake a bit earlier as well. And that seems to be the same through most of the corners in this sector, especially marked, I think, in the corner right at the end of the sector as they get into Sector 3. You can see here that Max comes off the throttle markedly earlier versus Lewis. That speaks to the way that Max likes to get into a corner. So he likes to brake early, turn in early, and that allows him to float the car into the apex of the corner with the rear of the car a little bit more loose. That's why he's able to handle a rear end that's a little bit looser than what perhaps Lewis can do at the moment. And that gives him the speed to pivot the car, keep the car essentially four-wheel drifting into the apex, and lets him dictate the timing at which he then applies the throttle at the exit. So that's in 2019 with the rules set to promote overbody downforce. So you had all of the barge boards, the fences, wide front wings, and all of the intricate details that you could see on the car. Now, if we fast forward now to 2023, this is the same sector, sector 2 at the Hungaroring. And this time, Lewis Hamilton got pole, but I think that's actually fairly irrelevant. This is really just to highlight again what Max is doing. Now things are a bit more marked. He actually leans even more heavily into that braking earlier and turning in early. You can see it in the first three corners, and again, really marked in that final corner at the end of the sector. You can see that Max is really braking much earlier, coming off the throttle much earlier than Lewis is, and then floating the car into the corner, because that's the adjustment he's making. The style isn't changing, but the degree to which he's doing it is compensating for the fact that in this era, in the 2023 era, in slower corners, the car doesn't respond as well as it would have done in 2019. And I just want to highlight that again through a couple of videos. So again, this is the final corner of sector 2. That's turn 12, and you can see here in 2019, if I just draw a little arrow here, you can see that Lewis is much closer to the apex of the corner as he's turning in, whereas Max is much further away from the corner as he's turning in. That's 2019. Now fast forward that to 2023, and what you can see here is Lewis is turning into the corner much closer to the apex than he was even in 2019. And although Max is turning in a bit closer to the apex than he was in 2019, it's still much earlier than what Lewis is doing. There's a bit of compensation there happening for the fact that the car doesn't turn in quite as easily. So Max has to do his adjustment a bit early, but he's still maintaining that same technique. And this is different to say what Daniel Ricciardo was trying to do at McLaren in his slightly awkward years there, where he couldn't get on top of the car. So what he was trying to do was try to completely change his driving style in order to try and get on terms with Lando Norris. Now, all of this kind of took me back to an interview that Max did with the race's Matt Beer in 2021. And this, I think, is fascinating, right? So I said that I think he has a driving style. I think he adjusts his driving style according to the traits of the car or the track or whatever. And that's what I've just tried to show you. But he says, if you say this is just my driving style, this is how it's going to be, you will not be quick. I think you learn in your whole racing career, from go-karting to F3 to whatever, every weekend the car behaves a bit differently. So you always have to adjust to it. It's every weekend, constantly, you're adjusting your driving style a little bit to make sure that the car is working well. And of course, you try and set the car to your liking, but it will never be fully to your liking. You always have to fine tune, or at least you try it. And at the end, that's what makes a driver fast. Now, I would argue that that trait, that thing that he thinks that every driver has, that every driver uses to make them go fast, isn't there in every driver. Just look at what happens when you put Perez in the car that doesn't have the front end that he likes, or you put Carlos Sainz in a car that's slightly outside of his window. It's not something that is just natural. It comes from what has been built up, that knowledge bank that these drivers build up over the course of their careers in karts, in the lower formulae, and then even over their years in Formula One. And Max, I think, has had a grounding, a level of experience that almost no other driver has. It takes us to the age-old question of whether this is all about latent talent, the nature side of things. Are you born with it? Is there a gene that makes certain people better at sport, or is it about nurture? Is it about the data bank that you build up in your own head after years and years and years of deliberate practice. And with Max, it's really, really difficult to tell. If you guys haven't read it, Mark Hughes at the race has just released a new book. I think it came out last year, called Unstoppable, the ultimate biography of Max Verstappen. And I have to say, the first chapter leans right into this whole Max was the child of two racing drivers, but his dad was an expert in the world of go-karts from an early age. Even as a Formula One driver, Jos was immersed in go-karting and spent more time focusing on that side of things than he did on anything else, and even his own career. So he knows what it takes um, to succeed and become perfect at go-karting, and what steps you need to take in your Formula One career to not get left behind, when to make the moves, and all those kind of things. And having that, having the database that your dad gives you, that that means that the deliberate practice that you do as a go-karter, that you then can use as an F3 driver, and ultimately what you then use as a Formula One driver, is just so much bigger than someone that doesn't have that. Even if you start at an early age, if you don't have that intent, this is the deliberate practice that you are supposed to do. You don't build up that data bank. You're not able to make those fine adjustments that Max is able to do, that I've just shown you in the telemetry trace in the videos here. Max is at the level that he is at because he's able to adapt, and that adaptation comes from a massive data bank of deliberate practice that he has built up over the course of a childhood spent immersed in go-karting, cars, motor racing, and now sim racing. There you go. All right. Let me know what you think. Please like, please subscribe, please leave us a comment. I'll read every single one and I will respond to as many as I possibly can. And we will see you guys in the next one.